Our next speaker is a dear friend of mine, Henry Shee, from Naperville, Illinois. He was with us yesterday, and he did a phenomenal and fantastic job hosting our first day. Today, he'll be telling us more about the Youth Advisory Council's Mental Health Handbook and what the act did, what they did it, well, why they did it, and what you can do with it. After Henry's talk, check your email. You were all sent a copy of the handbook that he'll be talking about. So, without further ado, Henry Shee.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, and thank you, Caleb, for the wonderful introduction. As Caleb said, I'm Henry Shee, and I'll be presenting the Youth Advisory Council's Mental Health Handbook. This is something that was produced over the course of multiple months, involving second-year Youth Advisory Council members. And this is something that we actually finished earlier this year, and we're also able to present at NYLC's National Service Learning Conference. I think the important thing to note about this handbook is that it's really a case study in the IPARD process. And today I'll go through how our group used the IPARD process to make this project a success, and hopefully that description will provide something that you can learn from, and maybe it'll help you see how you might be able to apply the IPARD process within a service learning project of your own. So as you can see on the slide here, these are just some snapshots from the Mental Health Handbook. It includes a variety of different resources, including important statistics, tips on action items that young people can do to address mental health within your school and community, and other helpful pointers as well. So first, I'll just sort of talk about the inspiration for this entire project. The idea of the Mental Health Handbook really spawned from twin desires. On one hand, to do something to address the mental health crisis in our country and across the world amongst young people. And the second thing was to address inequities in resources, particularly in educational spaces. One thing we realized right off the bat was that a lot of the mental health resources that young people have access to oftentimes are going to be through their schools. For instance, schools might have social workers or psychologists, people who can help students who are dealing with mental health crises. The problem with that, though, is that there's a lot of inequities in the distribution of resources amongst different schools across the country, and even sometimes within the same district. A lot of that depends on the level of income, for instance, that a community has, which in turn affects the tax dollars and funding for schools. So right off the bat, we noticed that there's a lot of inequities in resources for mental health that students had. So we wanted to think of a way to address that. So that was the inspiration that we had going into this project. At this point, though, we weren't sure what it was going to look like at all. But we knew that we wanted to begin with this. So using that inspiration as a jumping off point, we started the IPARD process. IPARD stands for Investigation, Plan, Action, Reflect, and Demonstrate. And those are the steps in any sort of, pretty much any successful service learning project, ours included, follows this process. So we started with the investigation piece with our mental health handbook. An investigation really involves not necessarily thinking about what your project is really going to do at this point. Investigation is really about getting as much information as possible. So you have, once you move into the plan and action steps later, you know that you're addressing, number one, an issue that's really important, and also one that's maybe not addressed very much in other capacities already. So our investigation step involved a lot of online research was one thing. We looked at the websites of mental health centers, advocacy groups, nonprofits that are involved in this mental health space, and looked at some of the resources that these organizations might already offer, some of the information about and statistics about mental health, particularly among youth, that we wanted to perhaps include even within the handbook. And the second part of the investigation was actually talking to people. So it's helpful to go online because there's so many resources available online, and it's easy to find all that information. However, it's also important to be able to talk to people and understand what issues really look like within communities and on the ground. So for us, that meant interviewing teachers and maybe some school mental health professionals within our community to understand what sort of challenges they were dealing with, and sort of what the problems were for students facing mental health issues. So overall, this investigation step was about understanding the problem and sort of in the back of our head, thinking about where we might be able to fit in terms of a solution or something that might be able to address the problem in some ways. So after the investigation step, after gathering all these statistics and information about mental health resources, we moved into the second step of the IPARD process. This was plan. And this step really involved having some serious discussions on our team about, first of all, what we were capable of doing, as since we didn't have, enormous amounts of money, we didn't have a huge team. So we had to be realistic, number one, and talk about what was something that we could realistically accomplish within a few months. And number two, to think about what sort of product would actually be valuable, something that might not already exist, and something that would address some of the issues that we might have came across during our investigation stage. It's important to be thinking about these different variables, not only what you want to accomplish, but thinking also about what you're capable of accomplishing, because if you're overly ambitious in the plan stage, you might get to a point later on where you realize what you're doing is unsustainable or infeasible, and you'll need to go back. So just make sure that you're being honest with this. And that's one thing that we tried to do while we were planning this. So after the plan stage, we moved on to the action stage. And the action is fairly straightforward, but it was important for us to be organized in completing the handbook amongst ourselves. We came up with a list of different tasks that need to be accomplished, and we split up the work, each working on our different sections, and ultimately we ended up combining those sections and put our heads together on any problems that came up. that maybe one person wasn't able to solve within their section. But yeah, the action process took a few months. It involved regular meetings, checking in with the group, making sure that everything was going in a way that would help us deliver a product by our end date. And yeah, the final process, the final part of the IPARD process was reflection and demonstration. And this is actually ongoing. And it's sort of what I'm doing right now in terms of talking about our process, reflecting on what went well, what could have went better, and ultimately sharing the process to inspire others and show others what they might be able to do in terms of service learning. So yeah, that's sort of a highlight of the IPARD process for our group, how that worked out, and ultimately led to a completed handbook that youth across the country can use to create a mental health initiative within their community. Yeah, so I suppose I'll talk more about the handbook itself now. So the handbook, if you're interested in mental health, if you want to help within your community, the handbook that we created is a great way to start. It provides a lot of background information to get you set up and lots of tips on different things that you could do, such as creating a mental health club, creating fundraisers, other things that might be able to support this issue. As Caleb and Bella have mentioned, that handbook will be emailed to you and you'll have access to that. And yeah, that's sort of all I have to say about this right now. Are there any questions from anyone? So, okay, I see a question in the chat from Julie. What did you learn about yourself? Well, I think an important thing with this project was just communication and working in a team. And I was able to learn more about how to communicate successfully with people, make sure that things are coming in, and also to work effectively to meet a timeline. What were some challenges and how did you overcome them? Question from Raphael. I mean, I think one challenge for our group was actually in the very beginning in the inspiration area, because we were pretty divided on what topic we wanted to pursue. And this idea of a mental health handbook came out of a compromise to blend together two priorities that our group had. So, question from Amira, what would you say comes first, reflection or demonstration? Well, it is IPARD, so I'd say reflection for sure. Make sure that you know, you've personally thought about your project, reflected on it before you demonstrate that. That'll make your demonstration a little more effective because you'll be able to talk about what you did well, what you didn't do so well at, and it'll help you. It's always helpful to do that reflection promptly after you complete your project, so it's still fresh in your mind and the lessons learned are things that you can still take forward. So there's a question from Kai. What were the reasons people might have, if they did, object to your project, and what were the ways you fixed it? I don't think we had any sort of objections to our project. I think this is a pretty big issue when people recognize that, and it's helpful to for people who are interested in mental health, but they don't really know where to start in terms of creating something that might help their community in that regard. This is pretty helpful to them. Question from Gabriel. What has been the biggest obstacle in your journey until now, and how did you overcome it? Well, I already mentioned one obstacle, which was in the investigation/inspiration stage. I would say, another big obstacle was just juggling deadlines. We came pretty close to the wire with this project. And that was because we were all sort of pretty busy with school, extracurriculars, all that stuff. But I think the best way to overcome that is just constant communication, stay in communication with your team, and try to motivate people as well. Another question from Kai. What is something you might have learned from this journey that you didn't know before? Well, I think a big thing is you got to have faith, right? If you're at the very start of the IPOD process, investigation, you really have no idea what your project is going to look like, but you shouldn't feel intimidated at that stage with all these, you're learning all these issues, all these very scary statistics. You might feel intimidated by the problem and say, I don't think I could ever produce something that might actually be helpful to this issue. And I think for me, it was kind of that case. I didn't really envision this handbook coming together, but at the end it really did. And it's a great product that you all should take a look at. Who or what encouraged you to do this project? Well, we did this project under the guidance of our mentors on the Youth Advisory Council. But really, it was a topic that we were passionate about. It combined both mental health and equity. And I think we were innately interested in creating something for this problem. What gave you the confidence to keep on trying when you thought that it wouldn't be finished? Well, I think one thing that was definitely helpful was maintaining a sort of energy level and an urgency within the group. It was helpful to see that other people were passionate about the same thing as well, and that kept me going. What was your biggest inspiration to open this path? Yeah, again, it was just our interest in this area, our desire to do something about it. So there's another question from Kai. Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand your. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you for the clarification. I would say trust in the process. The IPARD process works. It's something that is fairly easy to follow, and it'll make these, what seems like a pretty intimidating project, something that's very feasible for you. All right, I think that's it in terms. Oh, one more question. What is the most effective way to start a project like this when you have something you want to do? You want to start with the investigation process. IPARD, remember, so investigation, plan, action, reflection, demonstrate. And if there's something that you're passionate about, start by investigating, look online, talk to people, understand the problem, and understand what possible solutions might be helpful. And that's a great starting point. All right. Yeah, I think the questions are winding down. So perhaps it's a good time to move on to the next section.